Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving deep today. And
Wait.
yeah, we're going deep on this one.
All right.
The Silent Majority, Men's Unheard History by Conrad Riker.
Oh yeah, I've heard good things.
You know, this book really gets into the nitty-gritty of how our society has been shaped. And, well, it really shines a light on men's contributions throughout history. You know, things we don't always talk about.
It's definitely a perspective that, you don't hear every day.
Yeah, it kind of flips the script a little bit.
It challenges the usual narrative.
Exactly. And, I think our listeners are really going to find this one fascinating, especially if you're interested in those forces that have shaped the world we live in.
For sure.
And right off the bat, Riker jumps into this idea that men have been like the primary architects of civilization. It's a bold statement, right? But he backs it up with some really strong examples.
Yeah, like how so?
Well, he talks about the Roman Empire, for instance.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The Romans, think about it. All the incredible things they achieved. Aqueducts, roads, military strategies, all of that. And Riker connects those achievements directly to the empire's expansion and defense.
Right. It wasn't just about brute strength.
No, not at all.
It was about ingenuity, leadership, organization.
It makes you think about all the things we just take for granted in our own society, right? Yeah. All the infrastructure, the systems that make our lives possible.
The foundations of everything.
Exactly. And a lot of that is built upon, well, the work of men throughout history.
And it's not just about praising the past either. It's about understanding those historical patterns, seeing how they might still influence the present.
Totally. Riker also delves into this really interesting idea about how the concept of masculinity itself has changed over time. You know, he talks about this double bind of vulnerability that men face today.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like this paradox, right? On the one hand, men are expected to be strong, stoic providers.
The classic image.
But at the same time, there's this growing pressure to be emotionally open to express vulnerability.
So it's like, you got to be tough, but also sensitive.
Yeah. Almost a no-win situation.
That's a really tough spot to be in.
And Riker argues that this double bind can have real consequences for men. You know, their self-esteem, their relationships, even their mental health.
Makes sense. When you're getting mixed messages all the time, it's hard to know which way to turn.
Now, another thing Riker digs into is the whole idea of gender roles. Like, where did they come from? He suggests that a lot of it goes back to basic biology, the differences between men and women.
Interesting.
So he uses this example of the Neolithic era, way back when. Men, because of their physical strength and their tendency to take risks, they were often the hunters, the protectors.
Makes sense.
And women, with their nurturing instincts, they played a vital role in raising children and preserving food.
So this division of labor wasn't about some, patriarchal conspiracy or anything.
No, Riker's not saying it was good or bad. He's saying it was a practical adaptation for survival in those times.
Right. It was about what worked, what made sense in that context.
Exactly. And he goes on to explore how those roles have evolved over time and how they continue to evolve today.
So are those roles still relevant today?
That's a great question, and one that Riker grapples with throughout the book.
I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, we'll definitely dive into that more in the next part. But first, I want to touch on one more area that Riker explores that I think is really relevant to our listeners. And that's the idea of leadership. He makes this really interesting argument that certain traditionally masculine traits have been vital for effective leadership throughout history.
Like what kind of traits?
Well, he talks about courage, decisiveness, a willingness to take risks. You know, the kind of qualities you see in leaders like Winston Churchill or Ernest Shackleton.
Oh yeah, those were some seriously tough dudes.
They faced incredible challenges, and they led others through those challenges. And Riker argues that those traits, those traditionally masculine traits, were crucial to their success.
But isn't he saying that women can't be good leaders?
Not at all. He's definitely not saying that. He acknowledges that women can be amazing leaders. But he's pointing out that these specific traits, often associated with masculinity, have historically been really important in those roles.
I see. So it's about understanding the dynamics of leadership.
Right. Recognizing that different traits might be needed in different situations.
That's an interesting way to think about it.
Now, here's where things get a little bit more controversial. Riker tackles this topic that often sparks a lot of debate, and that's the interpretation of historical feminism.
Yeah, this should be good.
So he argues that while striving for equality is super important, right? He says that some feminist movements have unintentionally undermined traditional male roles.
How so?
Well, he suggests that in the pursuit of dismantling patriarchal structures, there's been this tendency to kind of devalue those traditional masculine traits and contributions.
Oh, I see. So it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
And he explores how this shift has impacted men's sense of self-worth and their place in society.
That's a really important point, I think. It's not about taking sides, but about understanding the complexities of these issues.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that progress isn't always linear and that sometimes unintended consequences can arise.
Right, even when you're trying to do good things.
And that brings us to another key point Riker makes, which is the importance of fatherhood.
Okay, yeah, fatherhood.
He argues that fathers play this crucial role in shaping values, instilling discipline, providing guidance.
It's like a legacy thing.
Yeah, exactly. And he draws on examples from different cultures and historical periods to show how fathers have served as mentors, protectors, role models for their children.
And of course, he doesn't shy away from the challenges fathers face in today's world.
No, not at all. It's a complex issue, and there are a lot of factors at play.
So how does Riker see the role of fathers evolving?
That's a great question, and one that we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, I think it's important to recognize just how vital fathers are in shaping not just individuals, but society as a whole.
For sure. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here already. Where do we go from here?
Well, in the next part, we're going to delve into some really specific areas where men have made significant contributions. Things like the workforce, sports, education, relationships, health, even technology.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, Riker really provides a comprehensive overview. He connects the dots between history, biology, and societal expectations to paint this really multifaceted portrait of masculinity.
I'm definitely intrigued.
It's all about understanding that men aren't this monolithic group, but diverse individuals with a wide range of experiences and perspectives. So yeah, buckle up. There's a lot more to unpack.
Okay, so let's dive into some of those specific areas where men have made their mark, starting with the workforce.
Yeah, Riker really gets into how men have dominated those physically demanding jobs and leadership positions throughout history.
Right, and he makes this point that it wasn't necessarily about some kind of conspiracy or anything.
Yeah, not at all.
It was often just a result of biology and societal expectations. Like men, on average, tend to have greater upper body strength, and there's a biological basis for their higher risk-taking.
So those traits naturally led them to certain types of work.
Exactly. It just made sense in a lot of ways.
And it's interesting how he connects those historical trends to the challenges and opportunities men face in today's workforce. Things have changed so much.
Yeah, the landscape is totally different now.
And while those traditional strengths are still important in many fields, there's definitely a need for adaptation, especially with technology changing the nature of work so rapidly.
Absolutely. It's a whole new ballgame.
Now, another area Riker explores is the world of sports. He highlights how sports have played a huge role in shaping male identity.
Yeah, fostering things like teamwork, leadership, resilience.
Sports provide an outlet for those traditionally masculine traits we were talking about, channeling them in a positive way.
It's not just about physical prowess either.
No, Riker points out how sports can actually teach men valuable life lessons, help them develop emotional intelligence, learn how to handle competition in a healthy way.
It's like a training ground for life in a lot of ways.
Exactly. And he even suggests that sports can be a training ground for leadership, too.
How so?
Well, think about it. You learn how to motivate others, make strategic decisions under pressure, persevere through adversity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, shifting gears a bit, Riker also dives into the world of education.
Okay, education.
And he makes this argument that men have historically led the way in this field, from the ancient philosophers to the founding of universities.
That's an interesting perspective. You don't often hear that side of the story.
Right. We tend to focus on the historical exclusion of women, which was a huge injustice. But Riker reminds us that men were also instrumental in building and advancing these institutions.
It's about acknowledging both sides of the coin.
Exactly. And he raises some really thought-provoking questions about the current decline in male enrollment in higher education. What does that mean for the future? Are we heading towards a gender imbalance in certain professions?
It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Now, Riker also gets into the whole complicated world of modern relationships.
Oh boy, relationships.
He argues that navigating societal expectations and those evolving gender roles can be a real minefield.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy these days.
And he talks about how this pressure to be emotionally vulnerable can be confusing for a lot of men.
Especially since they're often raised to be stoic and self-reliant.
Right, and that can lead to miscommunication and conflict in relationships.
For sure. When you're not on the same page, it's easy to clash.
And then you add in the changing dynamics of the workplace with traditional gender roles blurring, and it gets even more complicated.
Couples have to renegotiate expectations and responsibilities, figure out who does what.
It's a constant balancing act.
And Riker doesn't sugarcoat the challenges. He's honest about the difficulties.
But he also highlights the potential for growth and deeper connection when couples are willing to communicate openly and adapt to these changes.
It's about working together as a team.
Exactly. And he even touches on the impact of technology, both the good and the bad.
How so?
On one hand, online dating has opened up all these new possibilities for finding partners.
Right. It's easier than ever to connect with people.
But it can also contribute to this kind of superficiality and unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, you got to be careful with that.
And then there's social media. It can be great for fostering connection and community.
But can also fuel insecurity and comparison, especially when you're constantly seeing these idealized versions of people's lives.
It's a double-edged sword for sure.
Okay, so what about this health stuff?
Right. Riker also dives into the unique health concerns that men face. He talks about the higher rates of heart disease, prostate cancer, and suicide among men.
Wow, those are some serious issues.
And he points out that while biology plays a role, societal expectations and lifestyle choices are also big factors.
So it's not just about genetics.
Oh, not at all. There's this whole cultural aspect to it, too.
Yeah.
Men are often discouraged from expressing their emotions or seeking help when they're struggling.
Right. There's this stigma around men showing weakness.
And that can lead to a buildup of stress and a reluctance to address health issues.
It's like they're suffering in silence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Riker really encourages men to be proactive about their well-being, to adopt healthy habits, and to seek support when they need it.
It's about taking care of yourself.
And recognizing that that's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength and self-respect.
Okay, so what about this technology thing?
Right. Riker makes this pretty bold claim that men have been the primary drivers of technological advancement throughout history.
Really? Like how so?
Well, he talks about everything from the invention of the wheel to the development of the internet.
Wow, that's a pretty wide range.
And he argues that men have consistently been at the forefront of innovation and progress.
I'd be curious to see the evidence for that.
He presents some pretty compelling arguments. He even suggests that this male dominance in the tech industry is partly due to biological differences in spatial reasoning and problem-solving abilities.
Now, that's a point that could definitely spark some debate.
Oh, for sure. But Riker isn't afraid to tackle controversial topics. He lays out his reasoning and invites readers to think critically about it.
It's about challenging those conventional narratives.
Exactly. And it makes you question those assumptions we often make about gender and innovation. Like, why are certain fields dominated by one gender or the other? Is it all about societal factors, or is there something more to it?
It's a fascinating question to ponder.
And it's just one of the many thought-provoking ideas that Riker explores in this book.
So he's really making us question everything we thought we knew.
In a good way, though. He's encouraging us to see the world through a different lens, to consider those alternative narratives that often get overlooked or dismissed.
It's about broadening our understanding of history, gender, and the human experience as a whole.
And that's what makes this book so valuable. He's not afraid to push the boundaries, to make us think critically about the forces that have shaped our society.
And to see the world from a fresh perspective.
Exactly. So are you ready to keep diving deeper?
I'm definitely intrigued.
Let's see what else Riker has to say.
Okay, so we're back. I'm ready to wrap up our deep dive into the silent majority. We've covered a lot, but Riker explores some more areas that we need to touch on.
Yeah, he gets into some stuff you might not expect, like the development of law and legal systems.
Yeah, it's easy to overlook that, but it makes sense when you think about it. Like all those ancient codes, Hammurabi's Code, the Magna Carta, even the U.S. Constitution, men played a central role in all that.
Right, it's not just about writing laws either. It's about those underlying principles, justice, fairness, due process.
Yeah.
Those are all pretty crucial.
It makes you think, how would history have been different if women had been more involved in shaping those laws?
It's definitely a question worth asking.
Yeah.
And it ties into Riker's whole discussion of men's rights. Right. He acknowledges that the focus has often been on achieving equality for women.
Which is obviously important.
Of course.
Yeah.
But he also points out that there have been times when men's rights have been kind of neglected or even infringed upon in that process.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly. He's not advocating for some kind of men's rights movement, but he's calling for a more balanced perspective, recognizing the rights and responsibilities of both genders.
It's about fairness for everyone.
Right. True equality means ensuring justice for all, regardless of gender. And speaking of men's influence, We can't forget about politics, which has traditionally been a very male-dominated sphere.
Riker dives into how those masculine traits we've been discussing, decisiveness, risk-taking, the willingness to take charge, those have often been seen as qualities of strong leaders.
Especially in times of crisis.
Right, think about those examples we talked about, Churchill, Shackleton. They embodied those qualities, and those qualities were crucial in those situations.
It makes you wonder how those traditional ideas of leadership are evolving today, especially with more women taking on leadership roles.
Are those masculine traits still essential, or are we seeing a shift towards different qualities and styles of leadership? It's a really interesting question.
And it's one of the many questions that Riker makes us think about. His book isn't just a history lesson. It's a challenge to think critically about how our understanding of the past shapes our present and our future.
He's basically saying, hey, if we're only telling half the story, how can we possibly create a better future?
It's a powerful message. And it really resonates with me. This whole deep dive has been eye-opening. It's made me see things from a different perspective.
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that history isn't just one narrative, it's a tapestry of different perspectives and contributions.
And while it's crucial to acknowledge the struggles and achievements of women, it's equally important to recognize the role that men have played.
It's about moving beyond those simplistic narratives of oppressors and victims.
Right. Embracing a more nuanced understanding of gender in history. And Riker also reminds us that this conversation about masculinity isn't about clinging to old stereotypes or resisting progress.
It's about acknowledging the challenges and opportunities men face in a world that's constantly changing.
It's about recognizing that men can be both strong and vulnerable, leaders and followers. It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experience.
If you're interested in exploring these ideas further, you can check out The Silent Majority, Men's Unheard History. It's available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
I have a feeling this book is going to spark a lot of conversations. And that's a good thing. We need to be talking about these issues. If we can learn to understand and appreciate the contributions of all people, we can create a better future for everyone. That's what this deep dive has been all about.
So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.